So this is October 18th, at least in the US, and 2008, and I'm Jan Rigsby, and this is a teleconference on transference. Again, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask.
Ladies first.
Oh, hi, it's Wendy from Australia.
Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you.
That's all right. People are shy. It's hard when things are recorded. Let me go ahead and start. And if anybody has any questions later, they can jump in at any time. So, when you're talking about transference, the most common usage of the term nowadays is for psychotherapy. And of course, it's related to the topics that are brought up in the Pathwork lectures. But you can relate one building to another, and yet one is a one-story device, the other is a skyscraper, the other is a Guggenheim Art Museum. So just because something is a building doesn't mean that you're talking about the same thing. And that's actually the essence of transference. So when you talk about transference, there's many different levels to talk about. So what I'd like to do is just start from the beginning, that transference happens every single day. We all transfer. There is a difference between transferring and projecting is simpler, so I'm going to start there. Projecting is simply taking your inner world and presuming that the outer matches without checking, without taking a reality check. Okay? So projection is, I'm happy, therefore the world is good. And I will interpret, I will perceive, I will deal with the world as if it's good. And to some degree, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if I walk around with a smile on my face, then it's very likely I'll get smiling faces in return. It's very likely that people will respond to me positively. But that's only a projection of my inner state of being onto the outside world. Okay. In transference, what we're doing is we're actually transferring responsibilities onto other people. So in transference, what we do is, if I'm irritated at something and you come along and irritate me, I take my irritation per se and I transfer it onto whatever you did. It's a little bit stronger than projection, if you can get that. Okay? So if I feel aggressive and you feel aggressive, my aggression heightens, because I'm transferring onto you some of the similarities of my fight. So that's a social transference. That's a mild level. When we get into psychotherapy, what transference refers to is that the difficulties that a person has interacting with the world actually get replayed in the therapy sessions. So if I believe that women are domineering and won't let me speak, when I do therapy with somebody, there's a very good likelihood that this deep-seated belief of mine will rise to the surface, and I may become argumentative with a female therapist because I'm actually transferring onto her my belief system about the world. Okay? Now, the initial transference happens back with the parents, and that's where these lectures start. So we'll be talking about parental transference, and then what we're going to do is move on and go into the reason why it's in the lectures, and that is that there's actually a level that's a spiritual transference. Okay? So you can understand transference from many, many different angles. Since I teach the Pathwork lectures, I use the Pathwork concepts. You do not have to accept them, but I work from them. So in another therapy, in another discipline, somebody might say, okay, you're born and you start from there. But Pathwork is a spiritual discipline, and we go back one step further than that. And what Pathwork presumes, brings forward, offers to you as the possibility that this is true and that this is how the world works. Again, you don't have to believe it, but it's useful to imagine it and to work with it when we're working with transference, or when I work with it. The Pathwork lectures suggest that we choose our parents, that we don't just pop into the universe because egg met sperm. That what happens is we actually have a planning team that works with us, and we are selecting our parents for the precise purpose of working out our spiritual task, or a spiritual task. So the parents are chosen for their pluses and their minuses. And the environment of the parents is considered, everything, their genetics, the kids they've already got, the kids they may dream of having, the extended family, the society, the culture. That all of this is considered in choosing the parents so that you can have the optimum experience for working on a soul distortion. That's quite different from the normal, the child is born and he wants to be happy, and the psychological explanation for why we become unhappy and where happiness may lie. From a spiritual standpoint, we're here to learn something. We're here with a task in hand. So in the choosing of the parents, one of the things that we're looking at is how can these parents reflect two sides of a coin. And the term used in the Pathwork lectures for that is soul split. And by that, what they mean is that if you are, for instance, coming in to look at an issue of integrity on your part. Now, you're not coming in to prove that you understand integrity necessarily. You may be coming in to find out what integrity is all about. In other words, integrity in good times is easy. What is integrity like in bad times? But you could also be coming in to learn the value of integrity. And you can do all these things from so many different angles that it becomes too confusing to talk about it generically. So while we have these lectures and they give us some guidelines, the actual work is done with individuals, talking about their individual path. So to drop out of concept for a moment, I found myself in a fascinating issue of transference when setting up this teleconference. And I'm going to shorten things up and make it a bit of a story so that I don't have dangling details and this doesn't take very long. But in the shorthand version, let's say that America is my birth parent. And I spent 7 years in Australia, and so there's a part of me that feels that Australia is like an adoptive parent. It's an adoptive family to me. And I learned to live there, I learned to care about it, I learned about their peculiarities, I learned about parts of them that Americans have no clue. And so as I came back to America, I found myself being very aggressive whenever my adoptive country was slighted in any way. Also happened while I was there when Americans would come visit. So what happened this week was we've had some trouble with the daylight savings time in Australia, which was changed from its previous time period. And so the messages kept going out wrong. And at first I was just annoyed. And then I started getting angry. Now this is where the transference comes in. It became more than the fact that the software people hadn't dotted all their I's and crossed all their T's and done all their homework. It turned, emotionally for me, it turned into a slight against my adoptive country. and I started getting angry. Now, this has happened many, many times before, so it was very familiar, so I was able to pick on it quite quickly. So when I'm talking to the service representatives, I'm particularly argumentative and particularly miffed, and I want the Australians to be taken care of, and I'm irritated at the Americans for being parochial about their time zones. Doesn't help when you're talking to customer service people. The point I'm trying to make is this, that by deciding that there were two cultural authorities in my life, two aspects of humanity who spoke to me, who meant a lot to me, who helped me find who I was. You get the idea. Try to just shortcut it down to parents. That I found myself taking sides. I found myself taking up for the perceived weak partner against the perceived overbearing partner who didn't make allowance. Now, in transference, what happens here is intellectually you can say all the right things, intellectually you can understand all this stuff, but in actual real life incidents, emotions come up. So intellectual knowing is fine, but the real understanding and knowing comes when you come across a real life emotional situation. And the focus of this work is not to hear somebody speak about transference and get it all clear and say, got it, thank you, let's go on to the next. The focus of the work is to get a concept, to determine if this is something that is useful in your life. Is this something I want to work with? Because some concepts simply aren't active in your life. If it's something that sounds intriguing to you and you think you might have some work there, then you start to notice day by day, week by week, month by month, when this kind of situation comes up. And as it comes up, if you can work it out, even if you just work it out a little bit, even if you just notice it in the moment, that's when you really rewire yourself emotionally. Because if the moment goes on and it just is and you get angry and you don't recognize what happened, that's how you continue to lay down more wiring that that kind of attitude or emotional climate is right and acceptable. But if in the moment of feeling this good cop, bad cop sense, you go back and say, you know what, I'm recognizing this is a little bit like mom and dad, or this is a little bit like whatever the situation is in your life. And you look at it and you see the parallels. This is a way of becoming more conscious of the unconscious scripts that are running in your life. And this is why we study transference. This is why transference is obviously quite important in psychology. And this is where also spiritual transference can happen. So let me speed forward just a second, then I'll back up and do parent transference again. In spiritual transference, the ultimate authority in any spiritual discipline is a higher creator, and the shorthand for that, for a lot of people, is God. If you're allergic to the word God, whatever phrase fits your belief system and makes you comfortable. But some higher power with some level of intelligence and some level of authority or control, either in how the world started or how it's currently operating. That when we work on a spiritual level, it's important to recognize that all this human transference and all this rebellion against authority and all this frustration, it really leads back on a soul level. And beyond a soul level, it leads back to our relationship with God. So it's simplistic to say that all authority issues are about God, but it can be very useful to consider that as a possibility. But if that doesn't work for you, if it doesn't feel like a place where you feel enthusiastic and you have some thoughts and you can work, that's fine. That's what parental transference is for. And if parental transference doesn't work, you can work with your friends, your spouse, your siblings. You can work with it almost anywhere. So what I was trying to give is an overview that transference is simply a human reality, that parental transference is a common everyday thing, and that for unresolved issues, what happens is the transference begins to repeat in patterns throughout our lives. And that it's valid to work on these issues wherever you feel capable of working on them. So if you're comfortable working with your spouse or your partner or your friend, that's great. And if you want to go back and look at your parental stuff, that will also work. And if you want to deal with, on a soul level, your relationship to spiritual authority, that will work too. So I put some notes up on the internet that I've mentioned. I usually work a day or two prior and I get some notes together. And I put on the internet a lot of notes about psychological transference because it's not used in the lecture. The lecture is extremely good about parental transference, but it helps sometimes to have some background. So I offer the background to see if it's worth something for you. It talks about transference. It talks about countertransference, which is when the therapist is in transference. Or, for instance, if you're having a fight with your partner and you're transferring onto your partner and your partner takes that and transfer it onto you, that's also countertransference. Okay, so it's just a matter of the point of view where transference goes. So in psychological transference, there's a joke version, and that is the Freudian Psychoanalysis. And that's the picture that many of us have about therapy, where the therapist sits on a chair behind the client, and the client lays on a couch and stares into the air and talks for an hour, and the therapist doesn't say anything, and then you get up and you pay him a wildly extravagant amount of money, and you walk out, and it's reasonable to ask what that's all about. The theory behind that is that if the client is not looking as an actual human being, then what will happen is the client will very slowly begin to bring up their projections and transference about human beings in general, so that the therapist gets out of the way and allows himself to overhear the client as the client talks about people. And without having something to focus on in front of them, the client winds up talking about inner struggles instead of objective reality. So that's the deeper understanding of the joke version of psychoanalysis. Now when you start tying facts to that person, that's where it's really hard to see that it's coming out of your imagination. It's all too easy to say, but, that person did this, or there's a reason why I feel this way. But the question that we try to ask when we do self-analysis and when we're looking at self-development is, isn't it interesting how I always feel this way when I get into an argument with a certain kind of person? Isn't it interesting that I always get on my high horse and feel that I must protect the weak? And if we track that back to our childhood and we find a similar attitude or pattern coming from parental arguments, that means there's something there that we might want to work on. Doesn't mean it's bad, wrong, or it's not a value judgment on this. But a pattern of behavior that goes back to your childhood means that you have a very good chance of continuing that in the future. So by resolving that, understanding it, bringing it to the surface, and having more consciousness about it, you can unravel this so that it's less likely to be triggered by other people. And the hope would be that you have a chance of seeing people for who they really are. Now, those of you who have read quite a few of the lectures understand that this lecture obviously goes right back to Lecture 72, which has the self-explanatory title of The Compulsion to Recreate and Overcome Childhood Hurts. And that's about an active mechanism that is based upon transference. Okay? So this is more about the underlying reality of human transference than about how we decide to fight childhood battles with our current partner or friend or job. Any questions at this point? Okay. So I'm going to run through a very small exercise just to try to give you an idea. Now understand that doing an exercise on a teleconference is an exercise in futility because it's not so easy to know where everybody is, what your circumstances are, or what you're in the mood for at this point. So if you will, once again, it's in the notes that are on the internet. You can download them and work with them later. But just let me read through them and just float with me. Just hear the words, hear the suggestions, and just notice if there's anything of value here that rings a bell for you. Okay? So imagine for a moment a person in front of you whom you're very close with. Partner, spouse, friend, and someone for whom you occasionally have difficulties. And let it be current. And it can even be the cashier at the local store. It can be a customer service representative that you had a talk with. So just let, for a moment, the image of that person appear in front of you. And think about some aspect of their personality that you have a strong reaction either to or against, positive or negative, doesn't matter. And the reason I suggest it's someone that you have a little difficulty is that's more of a lively relationship than a passive or bland relationship. And it's in the relationships where we are sometimes happy with the person and sometimes not, where we're probably going a bit deeper, where it's not a superficial relationship. So if you've got an idea of some aspect of their personality, see if you can put a word to that. Describe it in your own mind. A word, phrase, they act like blank, blank, blank. Or notice why you might have picked this person. I picked this person because, yeah, that person irritates me. That alone is okay. And think for a minute about the kinds of reactions you have about that person. Now, if you're willing, I invite you to close your eyes for a moment and think about your parents when you were young. Your parents today are quite different from when you were young. So close your eyes and just think about your parents. And imagine like you're looking through a scrapbook in just a few seconds. See if there's any similarity in this person to one or both of your parents, or in the interaction with this person to the interaction with your parents. So I'm just going to list off 4 things. Again, this is just to give you a taste of what this kind of work can be like. And of course, it would be nicer if we were working with a specific reaction or something more specific, but it's hard on this teleconference. So 4 suggestions. That you see the other person in the same way you believed your parent was. Big, tall guy. My father was a big, tall guy. They're both strong. A strong, simple similarity. The second is that you see the person that we focused on first as being like what you wish your parent could have been like. Third is you see the other as you were as a child. And that you are acting to that person like your parent did to you. So in other words, you're taking on the parent role to someone that you perceive behaving like you did as a child. And the last is that you see the other as you were as a child, and you act like you wished your parent could have acted. So again, all I'm trying to do is fluff up a little bit and try to give you some idea how you may have, without perfectly realizing it, in your daily routine, in your daily life, be acting as a parent, acting as the parent like your parents were, acting like the parent you wanted your parents to be, a better version of your parents, improved, better model. Or in some situations where you're behaving as a child, the way you used to act, and in some situations behaving as a child the way you wished you had been. More open, more generous, more dedicated, more supportive, something like that. So those are the kinds of the things that we're looking for when we look for patterns of transference. And as you can see, it's not simple. It's not something you can do generically. So each one of you probably has a completely different imagining, hoping that you were able to do that at all. So I want to go back to, we have transference with the parents because we're children. So in your relationship with your parents, nobody resolves all their conflicts. Okay? There isn't a situation where a child is perfectly happy. Now, I've heard that before. I've heard people tell me they had perfect childhoods. I have my doubts about that. It's very hard for a human being to grow up and not have some conflicts with their parents. Because the whole job that parents have is to curb and develop the natural impulses of the child to fit within the confines of society. Children aren't allowed to simply do what they feel like doing. And at some point, there's going to be resistance from the child into going into step with what the parent perceives as an appropriate way to behave in society. And that can be as disarmingly minor as a parent saying you need to use silverware. And they'll put up with a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old eating their eggs with their fingers. But at some point, the parent's going to feel like it's their job to enforce the use of cutlery onto their child. They've got to prepare their child to go out in the world. At some point, the child needs to dress their clothes right side out instead of inside out. At some point, the child needs to wear shoes even though it may not like the feeling of the shoes. And the parent has to decide that it's cold outside or the ground is too rough or they're going someplace where shoes are appropriate from the parent's point of view, even though technically they're not important from the child's point of view. Now, I know I'm talking about very, very, very subtle minor stuff, but it's so easy to come up with the big stuff that sometimes if we don't feel, I got beaten by my father, I hated my mother, if we don't feel all these gigantic, huge, thunderous emotions, we may think there's nothing there, but there's always something there. In fact, for a lot of the people that I work with, and for some of the things that I worked with personally in my own life, I found it very hard to put my finger on it because I had a, relatively speaking, innocuous childhood. And while I knew that I was unhappy, what I didn't realize was that I had judged my own unhappiness as being a problem. What we're dealing with in this lecture on transference is that suppression of my own opinions as a child continues to this day in my life. My willingness to be a good girl was not done out of free will. That decision was done in order to gain approval and love. And by developing, I know people who know me say, "What do you mean you suppress yourself?" But I'm learning. I'm opening the doors here. But relative to activists, see, I would see an activist on the street or somebody carrying a placard or someone screaming and ranting and raving. I'm horrified by that. That to me is Armageddon. That's a nightmare. That's beyond my capacity. I can't deal with people on that harsh and abusive and abrasive a level because I would naturally presume that I would be turned off, that I would be sent to my room, that I would never be spoken to again. So whether or not that's in my nature, it was not developed. Now, in a different household, you'll wind up developing children's nature with different openings. In another household, it is acceptable to rant and rave. It's looked at as an expression of fire and spirit, and the parents are proud of it. And they like creating waves in their community, and they like a challenge. The kind of person that enjoys debate and argument, and isn't afraid to upset someone. That's a different family climate. I didn't grow up in that. And yet my nature might have responded to that had I grown up in a culture like that. So when we talk about transference, I invite you to consider that the conflicts that you may have had with your family may have been very subtle and very mild. And if some of the suppressions that went on are still active, you may not feel them in a rousing way. So you may have to look at very subtle details. This is like being an archaeologist sometimes, and I just love the picture of an archaeologist, and there's a whole desert in front of them, and they're working on this little tiny square surrounded by string with a tweezer, and they're flaking, they're turning pieces of soil with a tweezer in a little tiny 6 by 6 inch area. When the picture, you pull back the camera, there's an entire desert. There's mountains. It's an acre of things to be looked at. And yet that person knows and is trained that there is so much evidence in that one little area. If you see, if you look, if you examine, and if you know what you're looking for, that it can be extremely productive to do this. So my experience is that a lot of the clients that I work with will to some degree have to look at their transferential problems and some of their suppression and the things they want to work with as if they were doing it with tweezers, because it's very, very subtle.
Jan?
Next, yes. Mm-hmm.
That was when you were talking this past, the word in my own life suddenly popped up very strong. Passive.
Uh-huh.
And I've been reading this material. I sense the importance of it, but I found that there's been a strong resistance to delving into it.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that from a passive viewpoint that would make sense, because I didn't want to dig up anything, to stir the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems very difficult or almost impossible to pinpoint specifics like you're talking about digging up, you know.
Mhm.
But I see the subtlety of all of those, and you get hints of it, and I have in the past, but I just kind of passive to that as well, you know.
Mhm.
And so that's where I find myself now, I guess, is reluctant to dig into that, but seeing the importance of doing it.
So we're often drawn, we're drawn to a certain kind of work because something's not working. Okay? So in the space where you have come across this work and you're enthusiastic about it and you're feeling that it has relevance in your life, that's probably why you're looking at the material. Okay? We've talked about it before. That's a bit of eros. That's your heart saying there's something in here for me and I want it. Okay? Then we do at some point have to decide where to start working. And in terms of where to start working, the easiest place to start working is where something's not functional or where something is dysfunctional or where we have disharmonious events occur in our life. So taking your statement as an example, it would be very subtle work, but if you had a growing unease about the possibility that you were more passive than you realized.
That's what suddenly dawned on me in this discussion, yeah.
Okay, so that's fine. That's a place to work. There's no drama there, no Sturm and Drang, and no, thrashing of pillows and so forth. And it's still very, very important and valuable work to do. So what you would be looking for once you got that idea is you'd start to look for patterns in your life. Moments in your day when you had the choice to speak up or not speak up, and there was it's as if you rack up, sorry, it's as if you scored every interaction you had, and you scored it active or passive, and you noticed that the majority of your interactions with people were from your scoring position, your decision on how to score, passive. Then you take a look at, is that real? I mean, some people are passive, but what I try to point out to people is the initial premise is that you were concerned. The initial premise is you had a growing unease. You had a suspicion that something wasn't right. And you need to hold on to that. You need to believe that if you think something isn't right, then either it is, and you need to understand it better, or it isn't, and you may need to understand how you got there. So if you are uneasy about it, maybe all you need to do is examine it and look at every issue and say, I understand that I'm passive most of the time, but after I analyze it, I'm happy with myself. I think these positions are appropriate. I think these interaction, I don't think that I'm giving myself away. And yes, I can see where the word passive could be applied. That's a valid exercise in self-analysis. It is valid to look at something even if you don't think it should be changed, because once you finish that analysis, you would probably be more comfortable with your own sense of passive. You would very likely be more at ease with yourself, more relaxed. And if there were any inhibitions or if there was anything wrong, they might work themselves out. Does that make sense?
It does, but as you were talking, I seemed to flash that a lot of that, maybe it's just the initial kind of discovery of that in this way that makes me seem like a lot of that should be different,
Mm-hmm. So it's not a value judgment. And sometimes we do have value judgments. You may have a value judgment about being passive, and yet you may like it. So the work is to become more at ease, to bring these two pieces together. This is what my nature is, and this is my judgment of that nature. And when you can bring your judgment into alignment and say, I'll work on my judgment so I'm not negative about it, and I don't disparage other people for their choices. And I also want to honor my choices. Now, the other way that this could work out is that you could look at these incidents and decide, I'm actually more passive than I think is appropriate. And then you start looking at why. That does not mean you start marching in the street with placards. Okay, that's an all or nothing scenario. But you may find that you need to push the edges of how you interact with people, of what you do, to find a new comfort zone. And what this work is...
The place for that is remembering that those minute or even larger situations with your parents.
Yes, it can be, because it's very likely that if you are not following your true nature, that began a long time ago. So let's. I know that we've been talking about a lot of other subtle things. Sometimes these teleconferences go places I didn't realize they were going to go, and that's a good thing. And then people say, where was the transference part? So I want to make sure I bring that in. In the transference part, this is how, let's work with this example because I think it's a very good example. I think it's very subtle. I think it's very common, more common than people realize. Okay, so let's take the example of somebody who just thinks twice before they speak. Every single time they speak. And what that means is they lose their opportunity. They tend to have a more passive role because they're never quick and there first. Okay? If you track back to your parents and consider how they argued, how did they deal with disagreements? What was their opinion about somebody who spoke up and was wrong? You may, and once again, you can feel how this really needs to be an individual study. I can't start making generalities about this because it goes in too many directions at once. But in a real person's life, there would be answers to those questions, so that you can argue to a certain extent and for a certain length of time, and then a cap is put on. And that cap could be put on by the other person simply walking out of the room, or by exploding in rage. And intuitively and instinctively, what we learn as children is don't go too far. And we learn that because while an adult can take the anger of their partner, to children we think that that's the end of the world. That when dad walks out of the room in a huff, we may, on an unconscious, undeveloped level, worry that he's not going to come back. And then, if you want to put a little spice of drama in that, have a few incidents where he stayed mad for a week. Again, his wife might, I'm using a male example, his wife might be able to tolerate that. She knows him real well. She's not too worried about it. That's his problem, not mine. But to a child, a week is a huge period of time. And what the child is learning is that's the consequence of speaking up. Therefore, either I won't speak up, or when I speak up, it will be perfect so that I don't risk this. And that's assuming that you don't speak up for the right thing and get chewed out anyway. So, depending on the dysfunction and the humanity of your parents, again, you're learning to gerrymander. When I was a kid, I read this story. It was a great story by Alfred Payson Terhune, and he wrote dog stories, and I was into dog stories for a long time. Checked out all the books in the library about dog stories. And he wrote a short story about a blind dog that the family just didn't want to put down. And so the dog was very smart and very loving, and the family just kept supporting it, and somehow it managed to be not, it wasn't a terrible thing, and everybody got along. And they lived on a farm. And one day a stranger came to the farm, and the owner said, was talking about this blind dog, and so the owner called the dog. And the dog was on the other side of the farmyard, or the big driveway, that kind of thing. And the dog starts to lope over to its owner. Only it zigs and zags and walks around every single piece of equipment that it has ever bumped its nose into its entire life. That this dog was smart enough to survive because it could remember the lawnmower, and it would be running across the yard to its master and hit the lawnmower. And in the dog's mind it said, lawnmower, hurt, ow, don't do that. And it kept a map in its head, and it would X out, don't go there. So if you can imagine this blind dog starting to cross the yard and avoiding the tractor, the lawnmower, the neighbor's car, everything that had ever been left out in that yard. This dog is still walking around. Because the only way for the dog to find out it's not there is to risk bumping its nose into it and falling down. That's what we're like. We don't want to get shamed. We don't want to get hurt. We don't want to be embarrassed. We don't want to make people we love angry. We don't want to create household problems. We don't want to make our mother ashamed in front of her friends. All these things are very serious. They hurt. We feel them. And it's as if in some part of our psyche we may draw an X through them. Now, there are other ways to defend. Sometimes you roar right through them. That's a different way of defending. But I'm focusing on a more subtle kind of defense that shows up in not doing things rather than doing things. Now that's the net result. And if we talk about transference, what we're talking about is your parents very, very likely had differing points of views on certain things. The things that don't give you grief, you may not even remember, or they're humorous stories. What we're talking about here is the places where your parents had different points of view, different perspectives, different attitudes, different ways of being in areas where you felt pain. Pain. So in other words, let's take an issue of integrity. And I'm just picking genders stereotypically. Please excuse me, but I guess it doesn't matter, but sometimes I feel bad about it. Let's say that the woman of the household who does have to take care of social arrangements and who is responsible for interaction with family and social members feels that white lies they just need to happen, and that there's nothing wrong with them, and even if they get bigger or they become problems, white lies are an acceptable way to work with other people. And let's say that the father feels very uncomfortable with lies of any kind. Okay? Very subtle distinction. And yet what happens to children is they wind up having to run errands for their parents. Johnny, go next door and borrow a cup of sugar and tell her I've run out. When the kid is looking and there's sugar on the counter, he says, but Mom, there's sugar on the counter. And she says, well, I need that for this and this and this. So I really need more, but I don't want to ask for more. So tell her I've run out. And yet the child has also been around his father, who has emphasized telling the truth, being honest, being upright. Now, you send this little kid next door to lie to the neighbor. And this child has not made peace with his own sense of values about white lies. This poor kid is in torment. This child feels pain. They can, in this example. They feel embarrassed. They feel ashamed. They're afraid their father will find out. They're afraid the neighbor will find out. And they don't have the defenses that an adult would have. If an adult got caught in a white lie, they might laugh and say, well, you know how that is, and the neighbor might laugh and so forth. But children don't have these defenses. So in the tiniest example of being asked by one parent to carry something out that involves values that they know the other parent doesn't agree with or has arguments against, puts a child in the middle of a moral dilemma. And very few parents have the time or the therapeutic skills or the understanding in that particular moment to realize what might have happened to that child. And what Patrick is saying is it's meant to happen that way. That's natural and normal, and that's part of childhood. And the accumulation of these experiences, where we have felt pain and how we deal with that pain, come into our personality and our character, and they become ways that we deal with society. But if we haven't resolved it, we're still in conflict. So you wind up being a grown person who has never quite figured out the place of white lies in interactions with other people. Now again, I hope this doesn't sound too subtle. This is a place of agony for a lot of people. This is a place that stops them from being fully present. This is a place that stops them from being, from having free conversations, because they've got this little conflict about what do I say and what is your opinion, and if I tell you I did a white lie, what would you think? My father would blow up. You might blow up. This is what we're talking about in terms of transference. Where we look at somebody and we think, I wonder if you think like my dad thought. Or do you think like my mother thought? So I need to figure out who you are so that I can present myself in a way that will allow me to be recognized with dignity and respect. Does that kind of help you out, Harry?
Yeah, it's a pretty good example. It was entering my mind that thinking of parents, one was pretty passive, when they were together, and the other was more active, I perceive. So I don't know if that has any bearing in all of that or not.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. So the active parent, there are pluses and minuses to being active, and there are pluses and minuses to being passive. And you would have threaded your way between the two of them. Now, the areas where you threaded your way through and you found a place of equanimity where you're perfectly happy with your decisions, that's not an issue. Okay? So the only place where we look are the places where you're still feeling conflicted. And where you're still feeling conflicted, what Pathwork says is that we will find ourselves in patterns throughout our lives where this conflict keeps coming up for two reasons. Number one is the subject of 201, demagnetizing negative force fields, which is November. And that means that if we're putting out signals saying, I need lessons on integrity, you'll draw to you people who want to teach you about their version of integrity. It's like we all have little radio towers on the top of our head saying, I'm open to lessons about integrity. And somebody else says, oh, I've got it. Issues also. Or I can teach you something. Or here, let me activate you. I can do that. Okay? But the other aspect of these conflicts is that they will build defenses that we don't even realize are defenses. And that's what you may be referring to when you talk about, and I'm just taking your word for it, that it's possible that you're more passive than you may, than your nature may be. That passivity may be a defense. It may have been learned behavior that is so ingrained that it's going to take some work to pull that out. Now, you may never become an activist, but then that may not be your nature anyway. The work is to find a place of balance, a place where there are conflicts, but they're not chronic, and they don't seem dysfunctional, and when they come up, I deal with them. Rather than feeling like you've got an inner virus, something's not right, I don't know what it is, and at some point I'm afraid something's wrong. It's like having something wrong with you and being afraid to go to the doctor. The fear will eat you up and give you a heart attack, even though it was just a mild infection in the extreme. In this kind of work, our unwillingness to look at deep-seated conflicts in our life will create a superimposed level of anxiety. And once we've covered that up 2 or 3 times, we are living in fear to some degree, sometimes for no reason at all. Because if we went down there and looked at it, it's not so bad. So I realize that we're talking in a very floaty, generic way about transference. But again, I think that can be important sometimes because the simplistic transference is much easier to find, and it usually gets dealt with. But the subtler areas that are due of transference, we can sometimes not go there because we feel that going there does not honor our parents. Let's go back to the example of white lies and integrity. I may feel like a decision never to white lie, never to tell anything but the unvarnished truth, is a way of supporting my father. It's also a way of irritating most of the people around me. But it can also be a passive-aggressive attack on my mother. Okay? I need to know that. I need to realize that that's not necessarily in integrity, that clinging to one parent's point of view and disregarding or denigrating another parent's point of view, that doesn't mean I'm in integrity. And if the issue is integrity, I'm not resolving the issue. I'm trying to find a pseudo-solution. I'm trying to find a camp to live in that makes me happy. That's a whole different issue than I usually try to put in 2 lectures, partly to cover my debts, partly because my deepest fear is that I'll name a lecture and nobody will want to read it or be interested in it. So I put out 2, figuring if you don't like one, you'll like the other. And the other one I picked was the Path to the Real Self chapter. It's confusing whether it's chapter 10 or 11. It depends on how you count through the chapters. And it talks about parents and images. Okay? And the reason I picked this to go with the transference lecture is the title of lecture 118 is Duality Through Illusion. And that kind of gives you a sense of what the lecture is about. The lecture is about trying to make a choice through the illusion that choice is necessary. Just because one parent lives their life one way and one parent lives their life the other does not mean necessarily that you have to make a choice. But it can sure seem like that in a day-to-day life situation. And the day-to-day life situation is a dualistic way of looking at things. I have to choose whether to tell the truth or come up with a story. Okay? When we talk about the lecture on parents and images, talks about how we even if we're looking at one parent versus the other, we're probably not really looking at the actual parent. That it is very, very likely that we have created an image of what that parent is. So it kind of puts us 3 or 4 steps further into fantasy. Number one, we think we have to make a choice. We don't have to make a choice. And secondly, we're making a choice on perceptions that are not real. They're not true. So again, these lectures, what these lectures are trying to give you is a sense that as adults, we sometimes treat the perceptions we had as children as if they were adult perceptions seen from a small body. But that's not what they were. What a child perceives is based upon what it knows. There was a lovely little BBC documentary about children, and it talked about the fact that when a parent is trying to get a child to be toilet trained, and a child will sometimes have a terrible fear of the toilet, and the parent doesn't understand it. The parent logically goes through, shows them the mechanism, you explain over and over and over again, and the kid still acts like there's something terrible in this toilet and won't sit down. And at some point a parent can lose patience and simply picks the kid up and plops it on the toilet and says, "You stay here until you're done." Okay? It's actually quite reasonable. At some point you've got to go on, or as a parent you feel you must just go on with life, and you can't take every fear the child has too extremely. What this little BBC documentary did was they talked about it from a child psychologist, obviously figured this out from the child's point of view. And the child actually has a very strong perception that anything its body produces is theirs. They don't see it like we do. They don't see it as an objective thing, especially an objective dirty thing that needs to be gotten rid of. The kid sees this thing as a magical substance that came out of their body, and they're going, "Whoa, look at this!" And the parent says, "Put it in the toilet," and then the parent flushes the toilet, and the beautiful, wonderful thing goes away forever. And what the child psychologist pointed out was that to some extent, a child being placed on a toilet can have the feeling that if they slip in, and after all, they're kind of small, it could happen. If they slipped in and someone flushed, that they could disappear forever. This is not simply a sanitary device. This is a device that takes things away forever. And the child is being asked to sit on this thing totally naked, totally vulnerable, and put its tender, sensitive little parts within reach of this water monster. This is a perception that we don't have as adults. Forgotten. We later learned the value of toilets, and we later learned the value, and all these learnings that we have are so strong that we have a difficult time going back to the place where we saw this thing as sucking the life force out of the universe. If something that simple can be so difficult for us to reconstruct from that tender, ignorant child's point of view, imagine all the other things that we're handed, that we have to handle as we are being groomed to enter society and become a working member of society. Imagine all the contradictions that we're being handed, that adults have resolved, and they're simply handing them to us and say, "Here, do this because it's right." And we do not have the tools and the skills to verbalize, much less conceive of, what our objections might be. So when we look at transference, it is really important for us to get that when we made our decisions, when we perceived our parents, when we started on some of these unconscious journeys, we were starting from a place of profound ignorance where we were desperately trying to make the world make sense. And sometimes we put round pegs in square holes.
Jan?
Yeah.
Using that example of the toilet situation there, when you finally grow up and you realize that it's not dangerous like you felt it was before, does that still mean that your original experience there has some effect in your unconscious?
It could, but sometimes the bigger damage is that you gave up your fear, that you never resolved it. So it's not so much that the fear itself is an issue, but how many of those fears you covered up. Now I'm going to go back to the archaeologist analogy. Okay? Imagine that you've got, no, I don't know how to do this. But imagine you've got worms. Let's be kids around this. Imagine that you've got worms and they're alive and wiggling and you don't know what to do with them. So you keep pouring plaster on them. Okay? And when you pour plaster on them, the problem with the wiggling seems to stop. Okay? But the worm's probably going to die. And there wasn't anything wrong with the worm in the first place, except it was wiggling and you didn't know what to do with it. So a kid might pour plaster on a worm, and then there's another worm and they pour plaster on it, and another and they pour. So pretty soon they've got this box of plaster with a whole bunch of hidden wiggly worms, or more likely dead, decaying yuck. Okay? There are other ways to deal with live wiggly worms. You can put them out in the garden. You can get rid of the wiggly squirmy thing by planting it back in the earth. There are a lot of different solutions. But a child might find one solution that seems to get rid of the symptoms. And a child isn't responsible for having to worry about the environment or the extinction of this worm species. There's a lot of things kids don't have to worry about. They just need to stop the worm from wiggling. Okay? If we do that in our psyche, can you see where we're actually building the equivalent of scar tissue in there? And there's a positive intent. Somebody says, don't be scared. Well, don't be scared doesn't resolve the fear. So we park it someplace. That one single fear by itself is not going to probably be a serious issue. What we're talking about here is a pattern of not dealing with our fears and parking them someplace. If you have a pattern of that where every time you get anxious, you come up with a solution and it sounds as if the problem doesn't exist anymore. As an adult, you're actually living on a very, very thick layer of anxiety. Okay? And what we're talking about here is, everybody does that. It's not a huge drama. But if it becomes a drama, if it becomes a place in your life that doesn't work, now we need to start digging this up. We need to start exploring this and finding out what's going on. So we don't want to get hysterical about one minor fear. Okay? But if you have continually buried fears, they don't go away, they add up. But a particular fear about a particular situation is almost never a life event. It's just not going to become not going to create a dysfunctional adult. It's the patterns that create dysfunctional adults. Does that answer your question?
You can, at the present moment, perceive a particular thing as a dysfunction, but trying to remember where it all started seems to be pretty difficult.
You don't necessarily have to remember where it started. What you need to do is figure out what the mechanism is that happens when you deal with it today. Okay? So if your way of dealing with fear is to suppress it, you have a way of doing that. The work is about uncovering that, of making that conscious. Because once it's conscious, then you can actively see if you can make other choices. As you make other choices, you will find that you may find a different style of dealing with it that works for you. Okay? It doesn't have to be perfect. There is not a perfect way of dealing with conflicting realities. But there is a way where you feel comfortable with yourself, where you don't feel anxious about your decisions, and where you have a deeper understanding of your own personality and your own needs. And we work with transference because what we're saying is, what the lecturer is saying is that without you realizing it, a very, very large number of your character and personality mechanisms relate all the way back to your childhood and come from how you dealt with childhood situations. Now again, if you're happy with that, leave it alone. We're only talking about areas where you are not happy with how your life is going, where you are not happy with the decisions that you are making, where you are not happy with the levels of anxiety that you feel in you, where you feel out of integrity, where you feel that you are not expressing yourself honestly, where you may have other personality elements that were never developed. By tracking back to your childhood as far as you can and noticing why you might have suppressed some elements of your personality to prevent disharmony in the home, to gain love and approval, to dodge conflict, or to make yourself look good. All these different kinds of reasons could be reasons why you stressed one part of your personality and held the other back. As an adult, what happens to us is we're not happy. We feel these areas of undeveloped personality. And we're dying to express them. We want to exercise more of who we are. And we become dissatisfied as life goes on with the areas of us that have been allowed to atrophy, or the areas in us that are performing in ways that do not ring true to us. So the work in working with spiritual discipline is not only to honor the humanity of who we are, but to go even deeper. I want to speak to that for a few minutes. That in the spiritual transference, again, if we go back and say we picked our parents because this particular society, culture, these choice of parents, the extended family, the gene pool that we got born into, is going to give us a certain reality to grow up in that is going to emphasize, it's going to, like a blacksmith, it's going to beat some things into us. Okay? From a spiritual perspective, what we're doing is we're trying to manifest in a condensed fashion something that we want to work on. And from a transference perspective, where you've got the parents holding both sides, in spiritual transference, what you may have is a place where you are hiding something because you really feel that God, being so perfect and wonderful, would look down at you for who you are. Now, that's transference. because most of us do not know what the mind of God feels like. So we don't even know what our spirit and our soul feels and thinks. We think we do. But anybody who talks to me, well, I shouldn't say that because I do talk to ghostly things sometimes. Let me rephrase that. When another human being talks to me and I talk back, I am talking from my human consciousness. I'm not talking from my God self all the time, every once in a while for a short period perhaps. But as a general rule, I'm talking from my human consciousness, from my ego, from the person I am in this incarnation. If you choose to think that there's only one incarnation, that's great. Same rules apply. So when I speak on the phone right now, from a spiritual perspective, I believe that I am bigger, kinder, more loving, and more wise than the person speaking on the phone. I certainly don't think I'm less than the person speaking on the phone to you right now. How much bigger I am, I don't know. But I can't really know that. And I can't know that because I'm here. So from here, I'm limited. And as a human being, what we do is we anthropomorphize dogs. We anthropomorph, meaning we give it the characteristics of being a human being. We anthropomorphize the wind. We take everything in our universe and understand it in terms of human thought patterns, human feelings, human proclivities. When the other thing itself may not have a clue what we're talking about. So the wind may just blow. And when we say, I'll bet you the wind blows because it feels good, we're already making an assumption. From a human standpoint, that's why we'd blow. We don't really know why the wind blows. For the same reason, we do not know the mind of God. But in our attempt to want to understand, in our desire for development, and in our desire to be worthy of spirit, we will reach out and we will look at God and we will see in God human characteristics. And one of the human characteristics is to disown others, or to not think highly of them, or to be angry. So there are a lot of, specifically in the question and answer lectures, there are references to where the Bible does speak the truth. And I really don't want to get into it because I respect people. Some people believe in the Bible as written, and I wish to respect their beliefs. But there is a place where the Bible as written may express deeper truths in simplistic terms. So when the Bible says God was angry, what does that mean? Does God really get angry? Or does God do something that to a human being, the closest descriptive term we have for it is anger? But once we put that word on it, it just goes forward from there. If God is angry, then we need to make him unangry. If God is disappointed, we need to step up to the plate and make up for whatever it is we did to make God disappointed.
And the other one, God is a jealous God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a personal decision as to how you perceive God, but what I'm saying is that from a human perspective, the perceptions you use to try to understand the Creator are going from low to high. It's going from the human mind into a mind that's probably a bit more advanced than ours. Okay? And the likelihood is you're going to get it wrong. the likelihood is you're going to try to make God fit into a human arena, rather than you really being able to fit into a larger arena. So when we look at transference, spiritual transference onto God, if we think that we have disappointed God, that's, let's go with that, that would be a misunderstanding of the situation. But if we believe that on a spiritual level, then we might feel that we had something that needed to be resolved that may not need to be resolved. And so we would come to earth with this belief: there's something wrong with me, God is angry, I must make God unangry, or he will not love me, or he will destroy the world. And we've got a forcing current, we've got an urge, we've got a drive. One of the things that we may be here on earth to learn is that God isn't angry. That perhaps God has a more generous view of our imperfections than we do. And one of the spiritual tasks some of us may be dealing with on this planet, is to really embrace the simple imperfections of being in flesh. Now, what form would that take? The stories are endless. I hope you can imagine the whole different scenario of stories for which like Aesop's fables, the moral would be: there's nothing wrong with your imperfections. Just hold faith. Just have positive intent. Just love. Just tell the truth, and you'll be fine. But to really learn that and absorb it and really get it, we need to go beyond the intellect. So there's a phrase that I'm looking for here that was particularly beautiful in its elegance. Right. So this is from a thing I found on the internet by a psychotherapist, and I put it in the notes and gave her credit. And it says, what's important to understand is that simple awareness of the transference is only halfway to healing. To change your internal reactions, the brain needs to experience the transference in the present moment. This provides an opportunity for the brain to rewire itself over the emotional issue. To benefit most from the phenomenon of transference, it is essential that you be present with your feelings. To access your right brain, the seat of your emotions, a verbal discussion largely divorced from your emotional reactions will compromise your chances of embodied change. What this might look like in a session, and she's talking about psychotherapy, but this is also what pathwork sessions and pathwork groups and workshops are designed to do. What this might look like in a session is taking the risk of letting your therapist or leader or partner know your personal reactions or feelings towards him or her. In other words, of addressing the person honestly, and at the same time acknowledging consciously, I remember this. This is just like my mom and dad. Oh my goodness, these feelings have gone on all my life, so that the feelings are real and they are re-experienced and honored. But the cognitive connections allow you to become more free of 1-2 cause-effect, and to see a greater range of possibility. And the last line is in her article was very key. Knowing logically does not change feelings. And that's where the Pathwork lectures, as powerful as they are, as brilliant as I have found them and I have never seen anything with the wisdom that the Pathwork lectures have, they still need to be brought to life. They still need for these concepts and for these words and these lovely phrases of acceptance that the guide offers to us. They still need to be brought to us in the places where we have strong feelings, so that we, again, using the phrase, which can be unfortunate sometimes, I find it useful, but sometimes other people don't, we are rewiring. We are building new pathways in our mind. We are building new possibilities. I don't have to be honest all the time to be a good person. I can shade the truth for the sake of not hurting somebody's feeling or alarming them, and still be a person of integrity. Or I will chance someone's momentary anger, and instead of covering up my reality to make it palatable for them, I will be more truthful to who I am, what I feel and what I think, and I will let the chips fall where they may.
Less passive.
No, I think that's active.
That's why I said less passive, yeah.
Right, yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I misunderstood you. So in other words, I will take the chance to tell the truth. I know that the other person may not have heard the full truth from me, and they may be upset or alarmed or irritated. But in the long run, we're both going to be better off if I tell the truth. I've been spending way too many years telling white lies trying to keep you calm and happy. What I'm saying is there's an argument on both sides. There's an argument for not telling the harsh truth every chance you get, as if that was innately some superior way of behaving. And there's also an argument for being honest and understanding that it will irritate or upset people sometimes. It's not the end of the world. But either way, if you're hiding your truth or shoving your truth, this by itself is not in integrity. So the invitation here is to find a softer, gentler place of balance. So for some people, less passive. For some people, more passive, but it's not really more passive, it's less active. So if you think of this as a rainbow, where the colors are not marked off by bands or dark lines, there's a spectrum here. Okay, there are more choices than we normally give ourselves. And to be able to explore that, if you think you need to be firmly red, you may need to explore orange or purple. And then the truth may be, I like red. I was happy where I started from. But you see, the difference is now you know. Now you've explored the other colors, and you may want to wander over and take a little sip of yellow before you completely dedicate your life to red. And that's sometimes what our lives are about. We go places not so much because we're supposed to go there, but to basically learn that that's not what we thought it was. And then and only then we're able to let go. Again, going back to that lovely phrase, knowing logically does not change feelings. But going through life and expressing and experimenting and experiencing, getting things, giving things away, losing things, telling the truth, seeing what happens, telling a lie, seeing what that happens. The whole idea with life is to learn. And if you learn, then you'll wind up, it's like a chess piece. You'll be at some place on the chessboard at the end of the game. But the actual position on the chessboard may matter far less than we realize. What may be much, much more important is that we are at peace with some part of us that we were not at peace with before. So are there any other questions or places you'd like me to go?
I did have another thought I wanted to run past you with regard to this transference and see if it makes any sense. There's one word that I came across in that path of the real self, and it's dependency. The idea of children being dependent on their parents, and as they mature, they transfer that sense of or need for dependency on other externals, and maybe even symbols, that become false idols that should show us our inner world or divinity, but we use that as the answer and depend on the symbols rather than what the symbols are trying to tell us. Is that transference?
To some degree it is, in that when the guide talks about dependence the way in the way you're describing it, or the part you're talking about, this is a place where a child wants to stay a child. So in other words, if we felt dependent on our parents, but we felt that was safe, we may, going back to the title of these lectures, which is sometimes really useful, Duality Through Illusion. If we are happy with dependence, we may decide that dependence is safe and therefore independence is not safe. So we wind up searching for new umbrellas to hide under. Okay? And that's our life quest. I'll hide in the marriage. I'll hide in the job.
Other things to be dependent on?
Right.
Okay.
Okay? That's assuming that we felt safe. We may also, besides feeling safe, we may have felt relieved. Being relieved is different from feeling safe. So in other words, a child may feel that they're not capable of being an adult. So it's not that dependency feels safe, but it's a hiding place. And the result would be the same. They would look throughout their life for places they could hide. A job where they were simply told what to do, and if they did it, nobody argued with them. Where they were not asked to be independent. They were not asked to take risks. They were not asked to stand up. They might choose a relationship where the other person made all the decisions. Okay? And that could be a factor of safety, could be a factor of not wanting to grow up. Not because it was unsafe, but because it's too much work and we don't like it and we don't want to go through the gauntlet of being wrong. We'd rather sit back here and take the easy route.
Okay.
So that becomes a belief system, huh?
Yep.
Now, if you've got that kind of belief system, the chances are it was formed back when you were a kid. The dependency was an option. So one or the other parent very likely enjoyed your being dependent and encouraged it. It can be subtle, but it's still there. In fact, the more subtle it is, the harder this work is.
And the other parent might be the antithesis of that.
Yes. So I say this, and it's meant to be a compliment to the kind of people that I run into, the kind of people I talk to, the kind of people who bother to get on the phone or an email to me, is that I find that the people that I work with are dealing with some very refined levels of self-analysis and self-work. And sometimes there's a tendency, and I speak from my personal experience, when I was doing this kind of work, and I was in a group of 10 people, it seemed to me like one kid got beaten by their parents and the other kid got adopted out, and they had all these dramatic stories. And I felt embarrassed because I didn't honestly feel like I had something where I could point a finger and say, this was wrong. This happened to me as a child and this was wrong. And I feel rage about it. I want to work on my rage. Because I had internalized some very subtle stuff when I was a kid. And I thought that bringing that out was wrong. So the people I work with, in my experience, and maybe that's just because I draw to me people that, like me, did not find it easy to express themselves when they were little and wound up, to some extent, being crippled the same way throughout their life, they're not wanting to do something dramatic per se. They're feeling a sense of unease. They're feeling a mild dependency. They're feeling that there's some reason they can't get out in the world. They can't take a managerial job. They can't make choices that are confrontive to others. And in this way, there can be a subtle place where they're hiding under this umbrella. And they're just very, very nervous about being exposed. And sometimes this is for good reason. It's a catch-22. If you've never expressed yourself, you have no experience doing that, then that part of you isn't well developed. Then when you bring it out later, it's still not well developed. So the joke version that I use is that if you have a very, very angry child and you lock them in the closet and you open the closet 20 years later, the chances of a well-developed and integrated human being walking out of that closet are slim. Okay? What's going to walk out of that closet is a very dirty, very angry, very distorted human being. And if you take that analogy in, the parts of us that we did not develop because we were cowardly, because we were afraid, because our parents shamed us, because, 1,000 reasons. Whatever we chose not to develop and held back on. When we're 30, 40, 50 years old and we bring that out, it's not developed. And it's even more embarrassing to bring that out now than it was when we were 5. Now, everyone I deal with has developed parts of their personalities. Those are the parts that came out, met the world, went back and forth, got dusted off, got cleaned up, got adjusted, got modulated. And those are the functional parts of our personality. But it is my experience that people who work with the Pathwork lectures, people who work on subtle levels of development, are asking that relatively small but crucial parts of themselves that got left behind be allowed to develop. So when you're working down at that microscopic level sometimes, that's where the subtleties of transference, the subtleties of your parents as an image rather than who they really were. These are all tools by which you can begin to see the places where you were not fully in reality, the places where you ducked, the places where you didn't know what to do, so you didn't do anything. Okay? And this is where we work. And sometimes there's not high drama to this. but that urge, that little voice that keeps people coming back, that makes them go to the website and pull down lectures and surf the internet looking for information. This is our eros. This is our positive intent. This is the part of us that says there's more out there and I want it. So again, I really feel that I've wandered quite a ways afield from normal transference. I hope it's useful, what we've gone through.
Well, I probably led you astray with my questions.
No, questions are really, really important. The questions are real. Okay, sometimes theory is nice, which is why it works fairly well for a 2-hour teleconference. But the real work is in the personal. It's in our feelings and our experiences and the precise way our distortions have evolved over time. So if there's anybody else still on the line, and sometimes there's not, if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we may be done a few minutes early this time.
Jan?
Yes.
Hello, it's Melita here.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Welcome, Melita.
Thank you. Yeah, as you're talking, this is sort of, how can I explain? I'm actually looking at these things from a perspective of my daughter who's 6.
Mm-hmm.
And I notice this more often in her, what she's going through, as opposed to noticing it in myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if there's something that she really, really wants to do or have, and I say no to that, I get an immediate, literally stomping of the feet and a rage that comes up. I can see it happening in her, yet the words do not come out.
Okay.
I can see it being lodged in her throat, and I can see the inability for this expression and the turmoil that she goes through at that moment. And I so feel for her at that moment, yet I'm unable to assist her in expressing herself.
Okay.
And I feel quite deficient in that area to understand what at that moment she's going through. I mean, in a way I do, yet I feel I don't have the tools to help alleviate that pressure that she's feeling at that moment. And I so wish that I could do something, depending on my state at that moment in time, whether or not I am pressed with time, if I have the moment to stop and think for myself. Sometimes I am able to actually control myself in not reacting in a negative way towards that. And other times it's really, really difficult where I actually escalate the situation instead of dampening it.
Okay.
But what these lectures are actually helping me with is at least to know that this thing is happening and to look out for them in myself. And I'm finding it really, really helpful in that sense.
So the first thing that I would point out is how positive it is that you notice your daughter's struggle at all. For a lot of us, and I say this in a teasing way because what I want to say is for a lot of us that would have been enough, but that's not true because if we'd gotten that, we'd have asked for more, okay? But it's a beginning, and a lot of us never even got that, okay? So it's like taking baby steps. I want to acknowledge that you see her struggle, and that is not minor. That's big. That's a gift. And please understand that I'm just teasing this through as a teleconference, so I may say things that don't work. Just throw them away afterwards, not a problem. But one of the places you might be able to start is to name that for her, so that she knows you see her. What I'm suggesting is that you may not know how to progress and how to go. You may not know at this moment how to raise your daughter. Okay? Number one, you're still learning. And after you learn with her, if you had another child, they'd be another story. So you never get it right. Okay? Every child is a work of art. But it's no small step to simply imagine with another adult. If they were at a loss for words, but you could see that they had a lot to say. Imagine with another adult if you said, I'm noticing that you may have a lot to say, even though you're not saying anything. And I just want to let you know that I don't know how to help, but I see your struggle. That can be a wonderful moment. You don't have to know what to do. You don't have to have an answer. And what I'm suggesting is take what you've got. You've already got some insight. Use it. And if you think that a 6-year-old can't understand the subtleties of I see you, try it. You'd be surprised. It's a very gratifying thing for an adult to see us and not tell us what's going on in our head and what to do about it. It can be a freeing moment to realize I don't know what to do and my mom doesn't know what to do, but she says it's okay to not know what to do. Gosh. Can you see where, without knowing what to do, you can help your daughter become more human? Because the truth is, a lot of us don't know what to do. To this day, a lot of us don't know what to do. We fake it. How about helping your daughter become a more honest person? How about laying some groundwork where your daughter can be the one person in the room in charge of a company or a government who's willing to say, maybe we don't have the answer yet. Maybe we need to sit with it. That's a magnificent leadership quality. And it comes from sometimes a moment that simple. If you listen to people's biographies where they talk about their parents, they talk about moments like that. They talk about moments when they didn't know what to do and their parent put an arm around their shoulder and said, it's okay. It'll come to you. Now, I heard you say there was a list. Dum, 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 dum. But when you address A, B does not happen exactly the same way. Okay? And this is where we need to have faith. This is where we need to not say, but it's always A, B, C, D, E, F. And then there's the tantrum. Well, that has been how it's been. But if we do something different at A, there is a possibility that things won't go in that same pattern. Right. And as adults, it's our job to see those subtle shifts and say, we made some headway here. And next time, maybe we'll make more. Isn't that what adults are supposed to do? See from a greater perspective that just because you didn't get there today doesn't mean you failed. So in terms of transference, your work may be to look back and see where you were not greeted by your parents in this way, and that's why you don't have the answers for your daughter.
Yeah, it feels like I'm gagged.
That's okay. Go back and look without blame. Without blame. These were two people struggling to figure their daughter out. And they did not have the internet. They did not have psychology. They did not have pathwork lectures. They had older books, simpler books, common wisdom that may not have been as enlightened as the materials that are available to more of us today. And I'm trying to couch these in very, very gentle ways, because 200 years ago you can be a brilliant parent, and 3 days ago you can be terrible. It's not a matter of now versus them, then. But when you go back, be generous. Go back with love. And that's where I find that spirituality really helps, because from a spiritual perspective, they gave us what we asked them to give us. And they gave it to us because they were distorted in certain ways, and we knew that when we came here. We relied upon their distortions to help with our task. So to some level, say thank you, but finish unwrapping the present. Find out what they gave you. They gave you some positives and they gave you some negatives. The positives you get to keep, okay? The negatives you may need to work on a little bit. And they can become positive qualities. They may just simply be not well developed yet. They may simply be in distortion. But an understanding of distortion may be all you need to support your daughter as she tries to do the very same thing you tried to do. I wish I had been as wise and loving a parent when I was 20 as I could be today. And I think that's where the lolly you get is being grandma, because you get to do it again, only you're much, 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 much smarter. And you can show the world how well you've learned your lessons.
Is that Wendy that asked that question?
Well, she doesn't have to identify herself, but no, it wasn't
Well, I
Wendy.
just wanted to say thank you for asking it, because that was a good thing.
So take that, perhaps, Harry, as an answer to your question. All the questions are really important, because the questions come from us in our particular circumstances, and they have far more value than simple concept. Concepts are a starting point. They give us a room to work in. They give us some materials to work with. But it's our interaction with other human beings. That's what matters. So that kind of takes care of the time issue. Is there anybody else who'd like to say hi who came on late? Because we were kind of slow starting, and I went ahead and started before we had too many people. I beg your pardon? Aurelie, welcome, Aurelie. Anyone else? Okay. Well, you're always welcome, whether or not you identify yourselves. Very grateful to have you. And thank you very much for spending time working together. So thank you all.
but I